To understand why you're experiencing undiagnosed chronic pain that no specialist has seemingly been able to address or permanently solve, you need to understand that the human body is inherently built asymmetrically. And these asymmetries, generally speaking, make you a right side dominant human being, which would look like this in static posture. And the two major asymmetries we need to consider when discussing this and undiagnosed chronic pain are the functional asymmetries of the brain, best represented by this infographic, and the physical asymmetries of the diaphragm, best represented by this photo of a cadaver. So when discussing the functional asymmetries of the brain, we have to distinguish a left hemisphere of the brain from a right hemisphere of the brain. And this is because functionally they do different things, and this is why they are functionally asymmetrical. So, using this, I'm going to explain that. The left hemisphere of the brain controls the right half of our body, while the right hemisphere of the brain controls the left half of our body. And this is evidenced in a number of ways, but I think the easiest way to digest is look at people that have had any kind of brain trauma. For example, an aneurysm, a stroke, any other kind of issue that deprives a certain section of the brain from oxygen. Generally, the damaged part of the brain affects the body contralaterally. And by that, I mean an X like this. So if I had my left brain over here get damaged because I had an aneurysm or some other terrible thing happen to me, it would affect the right half of my body more, just like vice versa. If my right brain got damaged, affect the left half of my body more. And you can see that in people with a stroke, right? Or an aneurysm or anything else that was aforementioned. And I guess a stroke is more visually apparent, so you could see someone's face maybe paralyzed, limping arm, can't really get onto their left leg or right leg properly, etc., which, I mean, a lot of people can't get on their left leg properly already, and that's a huge part of postural restoration, but that's besides the point. Point is, it's more physically apparent in that regard, and that's very strong evidence for the idea that the brain contralaterally functions with the body. And even more important is that when I talk about the body, I'm not just talking about the torso and the legs, I'm also talking about the jaw and the eyes, which is why in postural restoration, some people do need to see an optometrist or a dentist that knows what they're talking about, because the issue isn't necessarily as simple as left AIC, right BC. Sometimes people have neck tension because their jaw is misaligned and they're using their right eye too much just because of human asymmetry making these things more dominant. Anyways, I'm kind of getting sidetracked because the next thing we got to talk about with the brain is the specialized functions outside the body. So the left side of your brain, or left hemisphere of the brain, is much better at analytical and logical issues. It's more the guy that is rational, for lack of a better term. So it's good with numbers, so math it's really good at. It's good with language, so speaking, writing, reading, etc., etc. It's good with science, so it's good at chemistry, biology, physics, etc., right? Kind of like the education system. That's how you have to think of the left side of your brain. Now, the right hemisphere of the brain is much better at being imaginative and intuitive. It's much more the emotional side of your brain. So it's very good at, again, imagination, ideas, coming up with that stuff. It's very good with rhythms and sounds, so it likes music a lot. It's very good with art, so it likes colors and shapes, drawings, etc., And this isn't to say that the brain only works unilaterally in this regard. So by that, I mean, just putting this down, that it doesn't mean that the brain is working only with these issues. So, for example, the numbers, letters, and sciences by activating the left brain. The right brain can be involved too, just like the opposite could happen where the left brain could be involved in some creative issues. However, the right brain, left brain are better at those corresponding things. The right brain is better at being creative, just like the left brain is better at being more analytical. And that's not necessarily an issue, it's just a matter of, it's how we were built, it's what they're good at. There is crossover, of course, but I don't believe that left brain versus right brain is a total myth, because that seems to be a popular contradictory opinion. And I think, while yes, the issue can be exaggerated, ask yourself this, especially considering that left AIC is a right side dominant human being pattern. Which side of the brain do you think is more active and why? If your answer was the left side of the brain, because you're using a lot more of this stuff than this stuff, you'd be right on the money, right? Again, kind of like I said, this is like what you learn in the education system in most post-secondary institutions throughout your whole life. This stuff is way less utilized. It's almost like being a Luddite back in the day, the guys that were anti-tech during the Industrial Revolution. And that's important to understand because it's a negative feedback loop, right? You keep doing the same thing over and over because you're utilizing one side of your brain more than the other. You're intaking information a certain way and not necessarily using the other side of your brain in a different way, right? And that's part of how postural restoration is a neurological issue. So we have to remember that doing certain things, being more creative about things, can be a good thing. Alright, let's talk about the physical asymmetries of the diaphragm. So, what you need to understand about the diaphragm is that we need to think of it as a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. Almost like two diaphragms, the same way you can kind of think of your brain. Yes, there is going to be overlap in how they function and how they work to some extent, but they are very different. And the right hemisphere of the diaphragm is a lot bigger than the left, as evidenced in this picture of a cadaver right here. Way bigger, right? And that's going to make it so that your center of mass shifts and lateralizes your body to the right. It's going to make it so you don't want to get off that right leg ever, and it's going to put you into that right side dominant pattern, aka left AIC, right BC. The other thing about the diaphragm to consider is where it attaches on the trunk. So, grabbing this, I will show you. The diaphragm attaches to, I think, the rib cage 7 and rib cage 12, kind of down to the floating ribs, as well as L4 and L5. And when you think about postural restoration, just going to put this trident back in frame there, you have to think of it in the context of breathing and walking. It's going to be about getting those rib cage dynamics back and those pelvis dynamics back when we breathe for the rib cage and when we walk for the pelvis. The problem is that with this asymmetrical diaphragm, there's more muscle on the right side of the body. We're too used to being on that right side. And part of that is because this right here, there's more muscle on the right side of the diaphragm attaching that lower lumbar spine, very close to the pelvis. It's going to make that pelvis want to go this way. It's pulling it this way as we breathe. And then the issue becomes more with right BC as we have that counter rotation of the thoracic spine to the left that makes it so this right rib cage internally rotates and this left externally rotates. Then we end up in that classic pattern of postural restoration that is left AIC, right BC. So that is how the diaphragm is physically asymmetrical. You have to remember that right side's a lot bigger, shifts your center of mass to the right, it lateralizes you, and it affects how your rib cage and pelvis move. It makes them way less dynamic, and now you're stuck in the pattern. And that is how your functionally asymmetrical brain and physically asymmetrical diaphragm influence how you feel your undiagnosed chronic pain. If you like this video, please like it, consider subscribing. If you have suggestions for content you'd like to see from me regarding this topic, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I sincerely hope that you learned something and that you continue to watch my content in the future.